All right, welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're cracking open a real botanical detective story, the case of the dying plant. Picture this. You walk out into your yard and a beloved shrub or maybe a prized tree is just suddenly failing. The leaves are drooping, the branches are totally bare, and you know something is terribly wrong. Well, we're going to investigate this crime scene together using real plant diagnostic principles to figure out exactly why that plant is going down. Imagine you're the lead investigator rolling up to the garden. You've got the yellow tape up, you're staring down at the victim, and the absolute first question you have to ask yourself is, who or what is actually killing these plants? Are we talking about a microscopic invader, a hungry pest, or maybe some hidden environmental stressor? To solve this whole mystery, we've got to gather the facts systematically, examine the evidence, and clear the innocent bystanders to find our hidden killer. So let's start by splitting our suspects into two main camps based on the disease circle. In one corner, we have our biotic attackers. These are the living suspects, right? Pests, fungi, viruses, and bacteria that directly infect or feed on the plant. In the other corner, we've got our abiotic stressors. These are the non-living threats, things like extreme weather, drought, chemical runoff, or, and this is a big one, mechanical injury. Now, they don't spread from plant to plant like a cold, but let me tell you, they can be just as lethal. Look, professional plant pathologists use this really rigorous 10-step process. But to keep our investigation moving, we're going to condense that into 3 focused phases. First up, identify what is normal for the victim. Second, canvass the neighborhood, check the overall environment. And third, zoom in nice and close to look for very specific signs and symptoms. Starting with phase 1, before we just assume foul play, we absolutely have to establish a baseline. Because frankly, what looks like a gruesome death might literally just be a plant doing its thing. A classic example is the white pine tree. Every single fall, people completely panic because their white pine turns yellow and sheds half its needles all over the yard. It looks like a massive catastrophic die-off, but actually, that is perfectly normal for that specific species. If we don't know the baseline, we're just spinning our wheels trying to solve a crime that never even happened. Okay, so once we establish that a crime actually has occurred, it's time to look for clues. And as investigators, we have to separate these into 2 very different categories, signs and symptoms. Signs are the literal physical footprints of the culprit. We're talking the insect itself, cast skins, webs, slime trails, or frass, which is just the polite botanical term for bug poop. Symptoms, on the other hand, are the plant's physical reaction to being attacked. This is the wilting, the leaf drop, the blights, and the discolored cankers. For example, if you spot twisting, discolored trails winding through a columbine leaf, that is a classic sign of a chewing leaf miner insect, feeding right between the upper and lower layers of the leaf. Sucking insects, like aphids, they're a bit stealthier with their symptoms, maybe just causing a little leaf curling, but they leave behind a massive sign. This sticky, sugar-rich stuff called honeydew that coats the leaves and eventually breeds this thick, black sooty mold. But here is where it gets incredibly fascinating, the timeline. Knowing when the damage happened is usually our biggest clue. Abiotic injuries, again, those non-living suspects like an overnight frost, a chemical herbicide drift, or a sudden drought, they strike all at once. The damage shows up suddenly, and it basically doesn't progress after that initial event. Biotic diseases, though, they are progressive. A fungal infection or a hungry bug population starts small, and you'll literally watch the damage spread and get worse over days or weeks as the organism reproduces. We can also eliminate suspects just by mapping out the spatial distribution at the crime scene. If the damage is random, clustered, or scattered across the yard, it strongly points to a living, biotic pathogen that is slowly hopping to adjacent hosts. But if the damage is perfectly uniform, meaning it's hitting all parts of a plant at exactly the same time, or even crossing over multiple different plant species in the same area, we are almost certainly looking at an environmental abiotic issue, like a crazy pH imbalance in the soil or a severe weather event. And this perfectly illustrates how tricky diagnosing this stuff can be. You might see sap oozing from the bark of 2 different trees. It looks like identical gummosis, right? But it could be 2 entirely different killers. A peach tree might be oozing because of a biotic fungal canker. Meanwhile, a cherry tree right next to it could have the exact same gummosis symptom, but this time it's caused by an insect borer that physically injured the tree. So let the symptoms guide you, but remember, they are just one piece of the puzzle. Which brings us to the ultimate plot twist of our mystery. Just when you think you're hunting down some microscopic fungus or a stealthy, invisible bug, you realize the call is coming from inside the house. Yep, it is time to talk about what we like to call, oops, that was me. We really need to pivot hard here into mechanical damage. This is a non-living, abiotic stressor that basically just boils down to physical trauma. We are talking torn bark, crushed stems, and exposed roots. And while it can be caused by severe weather or wildlife, most of the time, it's courtesy of heavy boots or our own yard tools. To really understand why a simple bump from a weed whacker can be completely fatal, you just have to look at something called girdling. When physical trauma totally encircles a stem, it destroys the vascular tissue right beneath the bark. That essentially cuts off the plant's entire food and water supply. The tree doesn't get a disease, it literally just starves to death. Remember our spatial clues from earlier? We said random damage means pests, and uniform damage means the environment. Well, if the damage in your yard follows a perfectly straight line, that is a massive, screaming red flag for a man-made mechanical issue. Pathogens do not walk in straight lines. Tractors do. A human dragging an irrigation trenching machine does. A straight path of destruction is almost always mechanical damage. Now, mechanical damage isn't strictly a human issue. If you see jagged edges and violently torn tissue on branches, that's classic vertebrate browse damage from deer or rabbits just gnawing away. And don't forget our own pets. They can be super guilty of this too, constantly digging up or running over shallow root systems along fence lines. It is all physical trauma at the end of the day. And here is exactly where the biotic and abiotic worlds crash into each other. Every single time you make a bad, jagged pruning cut, or every time you accidentally nick a trunk with the lawnmower, you are doing way more than just causing mechanical damage. You are quite literally kicking the door wide open and rolling out the red carpet for secondary biotic infections to just move right on in. The results of that can be absolutely devastating. What starts as a totally innocent oops with a piece of equipment quickly snowballs into a deadly secondary infection. Imagine a massive mechanical wound on an apple tree being entirely consumed by white rot fungus. The physical injury broke the tree's natural defenses, and the fungus just capitalized on it, causing a rot that literally decomposes and disintegrates the plant tissue from the inside out. So how do we finally close this case? Prevention is absolutely our best defense here. We avoid becoming the killer ourselves by making clean, sharp pruning cuts. We stake young trees or put up barriers to keep mowers far away from the trunks. And we make sure to actually identify pests accurately before just blindly reaching for broad-spectrum bug sprays that usually do way more harm than good. Plant diagnostics is really all about zooming out and looking at the big picture, the timeline, the patterns, the signs, and the symptoms. So I want to leave you with this thought to help you solve your very next garden mystery. The next time a plant starts to decline, before you immediately load up on chemical sprays or point the finger at some mysterious fungus, take a really hard look at your own tools and your own footsteps. Before you blame the bugs, where exactly did you leave the lawnmower? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and happy sleuthing out there in the garden.